Good afternoon to you. Mark Sott with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Sunday, August 25th, 2019. You know, it was 2 years ago today that Hurricane Harvey made landfall there in Texas near Rockport and Fulton. And already 2 years. Wow, that 2017 hurricane season, really got started there with Harvey. And then not long after we had Irma and Jose and Maria. It doesn't look like anything like that on the horizon anytime soon in the Atlantic Basin. That's obviously great news, but on this date, just 2 short years ago, and people are still recovering from that. You better believe they are. It's a long and painful process when you have such a devastating event, whether it is wind, storm surge, or in the case of In the case of Harvey, you had wind, storm surge, and the tremendous flooding from all the rainfall up in the northeast part of the Texas coastline and areas inland from there, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Houston. It wasn't just Houston proper. Quite a bit of Texas real estate there flooded 2 years ago. Actually, it took a few days after the landfall for all of that to take place. Nothing out there even remotely resembling that today, which is great. Starting in the eastern Pacific, we have Evo here, now a depression. Not really much of a concern at all any longer. Some high-level moisture going to stream off of this up into portions of the desert southwest of the U.S., crossing over Mexico first, but no sensible impacts, as in impacts that you can feel or sense. S-E-N-S-E, sensible. Feel them, whatever. In the Atlantic, this is reduced now down to orange over the next couple of days, still red over the next 5 days, meaning medium to high chance of development. We will get to that in just a moment. First, let's take a look at Dorian. This has caused a lot of chatter about, something's coming, etc., and for good reason. You get a tropical storm in the main development region, the deep tropics this time of year, and I don't want to say that you just never know what's going to happen. It's not that random. But you do have to keep a wary eye, because sometimes you do get surprises. We saw that most recently, certainly last year with Michael, where the forecast at the initial onset was for a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm, and you ended up with a Category 5 hurricane. Now, it's not like that comes as a complete surprise. There were indications that that could happen. And similar with Dorian here, we did see yesterday especially, maybe even the day before, that the environment out here was kind of either way. Some of the modeling indicating robust strengthening, other modeling not so much. And so the forecast for this to become a hurricane, it's always good to err on the side of caution, and you can back off from there. As such, watches and warnings were issued by the various governments of the islands down here, starting with Barbados, and points west and west-northwest from there, and we'll see what happens. We'll go through this sort of piece by piece here, and I'll explain what's happening with Dorian. I don't believe it's going to make it to hurricane intensity up in here. I'll explain why, and I think by the time you get to the day 4 and 5 time frame, that it will in fact be dissipated. And there's a few things that argue in that favor. So first, let's take a look at the satellite animation here, courtesy of Tropical Tidbits. There are the leftovers, or there is the leftovers. How would you say? I guess it's leftovers, so it's plural, so it gets an R. I try to get it right. Here we have the leftovers of Evo trying to spread some cloud cover, very little of it, into the desert southwest and northwest Mexico. Little feature out here along the intertropical convergence zone, but not mentioned yet, that I saw from the National Hurricane Center. This persistent raininess and storminess over the northwestern Gulf. A little bit of energy there, but it's not trying to consolidate into anything that would develop into a tropical cyclone. And here, according to the Euro the other day especially, we were supposed to have a tropical storm by now off the Carolina coast, and we don't. Instead, we have a lot of energy spread out over a pretty large area, Invest Area 98L still, and we'll look at this in a minute when we take our next segment. We call it Looking Under the Hood. I'll check it out on the vorticity signature in a moment. And then here is Dorian currently trying to get a little bit more convection with it, but not much. And when you see it kind of in these blobs like that, I did a blog post about blobs. Whew, gotta be careful. Make sure you say that right. Or you could say you're blobbing about blogs. Anyway, I did a post about it on Patreon this morning, and that's a public post. You can go to my Patreon site. It's patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. I'll put a link to it in the description, and that's where I'm going to put all of my blog posts from now on, by the way. It's just more efficient. Serve everybody in one spot, whether you are a supporter or not. The blogs, and this is just a quick side note, I'm going to talk more about this in depth tomorrow, but my blogs, the written blogs, those will be available to the public, no cost. They should be. That's the way that should be. Then we can filter down from there about premium content. All right, that's the way I look at it. So the blogs are going to be at Patreon from now on, just so you know. And I wrote on there today about the sort of blobular. You have globular and no, I don't want to sign in. Thank you. You have blobular and globular, and either way, when you see the lack of feeder bands like you do here with Dorian, that's a sign that it is not very well organized. You don't have those curved bands coming in, and even on this satellite shot where it's kind of zoomed out, you can tell that. And I'll take a quick close-up of it in just a minute. I forgot to load that, so we'll do that as an impromptu thing in just a moment. Here's the vorticity signature of what's happening in the Atlantic Basin, and notice, as I talk about this often, switch this over to white, look at how stretched out all this is. All that represents energy and vorticity, vertical or cyclonic vorticity in the atmosphere, the relative vorticity, spin, energy, whatever you want to call it, however you want to spin it. Hey, there's a good pun. It's stretched out. And even Evo over here is a tropical depression, is a great example of the bundling of the energy. You know, I talk about this a lot, and in physics it's called the conservation of angular momentum, and the easy way to conceptualize it, again, I've mentioned this before, a figure skater pulling their arms in, they spin faster. And there's a lot of physics behind why that happens. And in nature, when something in weather is round, it's usually intense, usually. Whether it's a cyclone up in the mid-latitudes, you know, this is a pretty big round feature up here, relatively speaking, so it's a pretty strong ocean storm way up there in the northern latitudes. Down in the tropics, when the energy bundles like this, you get these storms, and just from a meteorological perspective, they can be quite beautiful. Strictly speaking, meteorologically and mathematically and physically, in the world of science, they are a beautiful thing. They cause destruction, so they become problems for you and me and others, absolutely. But when we look at it from a pure science perspective, it is really amazing that these bundles of energy here take on that rounded appearance, and when they are not bundled like this, the energy is spread out over a larger area and it doesn't focus, and you don't get the big wind machine. You can still get a lot of rain from these frontal systems, absolutely, and that's what this is a frontal system. All of this is energy over North America, and it represents different pieces of the atmosphere doing different things. In the tropics, over the years that I've been doing this, going on 25 years now, especially with the advent of the internet and its ease of access, this is what Mark looks for. Rounded appearances in the vorticity fields at about 5,000 feet in the atmosphere. That's where I start. And then you go from there. All right? So there you go. That's a signature of what we have, as I call it. You go from the satellite picture, you look under the hood, so to speak, and this is what it looks like. If you peel away the clouds and look at how the energy is behaving, this gives you a good idea of that. I want to show you something. I thought this was pretty cool. I saw this on a Twitter feed as I was scanning around looking for content to talk about today. This was from the GFS, initialized at 12Z, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, back on August the 19th. So that's several days ago, right? Well, 132 hours ago, roughly. and it was valid for last night. Okay, last night, Saturday night, 0Z August 25th, so 8 p.m. last night. And what does it show? This is the simulated infrared brightness, so it kind of gives you an idea of what the clouds would look like. Right? And so it looks pretty similar to this. So notice, this is today. It's not that much later on August 25th. Look, that's what's really happening. And that right there is what the model was indicating. And you notice I titled it GFS Nailed It.jpg. GFS did a good job. You got to admit. I mean, that's pretty darn good for about 132 hours or so out in time. And you can see it's small. It's got just a little bit of convection near the center, the deeper convection. And lo and behold, if we look at the satellite animation today, that looks almost exactly like it. Come on, that's pretty cool. You got to admit, for the GFS to simulate the atmosphere like that, that's pretty kick butt. All right, so going into the Tropical Tidbit site here, I forgot to load the floater for Dorian, so let's do that now. And I will show you the infrared because this helps to illustrate my point. And let's pop this out as an animation real quick. Give it about 25 frames. I like to do 12 frames a second works for me. And this will really help to illustrate my point once it loads. I need some loading music. There we go. Thank you very much, Levi's server and my internet. All right, so early on, it's clusters. Now it's a little better organized, but there's not really much in the way of that curved banding look. There's maybe one there, one coming in this way, but they are generally convection free. The outflow is trying, but it just looks like a mess. You know, it's not, you followed this stuff long enough, you look at that and you go, yeah, that's not a real strong, healthy tropical cyclone. There is upward motion going on in there, and that's the beauty of this satellite animation is you can see the bubbling up of the atmosphere right in there, plain as day. That is upward motion or convection, thunderstorm activity. But even the edges of it, these are all telltale signs. Look at that sharp edge right there. There's not a curved band feeding into that system that you can see on the infrared. It's probably there if you looked at the visible. Surely it's got some bands with it, but it just doesn't have that look. And when it doesn't have the look, in this case, you can judge a book by its cover, and looks aren't necessarily deceiving. It kind of goes against all that because we know what we are looking for, those of us that follow tropical activity, and this just doesn't quite have it. That being said, it is producing rain and gusty winds underneath these thunderstorms. And as this gets closer to the Lesser Antilles, remember the map over here, in the next couple of days, if it persists at all, you could still be looking at gusty winds, heavy rain, squally conditions, whatnot, for Barbados, for St. Vincent, the Grenadines, and elsewhere, perhaps. And on that note, if it were to, where were we? There we are. If it were to weaken some and take a more southerly route going south of Barbados, you might start to possibly see some impacts for maybe Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, it's pretty small in size, so I doubt that, but maybe some of those southern rain bands or individual little showers in association with the passage of the overall low pressure envelope. Remember, this is a disturbance in the atmosphere. It's a weather feature moving through, so it'll have peripheral effects. And on the wider shot, you can see it is trying to pull that one little band pretty far to the south there off of the northeast coast of South America. And so you have to watch for that as it goes by. If it goes south of Barbados and you get one of those bands trying to develop, then it could bring some heavy rain for Trinidad, Tobago, and maybe even to the coast of South America itself. We just have to see. That would indicate, though, if it goes farther south, that it is weaker. And that's hard to explain, but trust me, when they are weaker, they typically go more west in the deep tropics, when they are stronger, they can tend to gain a little bit more latitude. Not always, but that's a story for another day, how they get steered. We could end up talking for an hour here if we do that. Bottom line, though, looking at the animation, yeah, it tried to, have some upward motion there. A little bit of turning to it, you can see, but otherwise, too much blobs going on there, too blobular. And, that's not a sign of health. All right, so let's try to dissect this, all right? Let me use purple, violet, and outline some of these features in here. These are the upper level winds, and I'm going to just try to outline this as best I can. I won't get every one of them, but you're going to get the idea. This troughiness that's sitting in here. See how all these bend like that? All right, this tells me several things. This is all convergence through here. The air is converging, coming together in the upper levels. Sinking motion ensues. Okay, this is air coming together at the upper levels. Very, very important. All through here. I'm going to switch it over to this yellow color. Let's use my highlighter. So all of this through here, sinking motion, this tropical upper tropospheric trough, this pinching off of the upper levels, it's not conducive to development. So over here to the east, this is your anticyclonic flow, and this is conducive to development. And look where Dorian resides, right on the edge of the envelope there. Because right here, these winds are screaming. They're hauling it. Well, relatively speaking anyway, out of the south-southwest to southwest. So they're from the southwest to the northeast, and Dorian is headed right into that. Everything moves. It's not stationary. There's literally not a shredder sitting there that never moves. Stuff can change, but in this case, the way the modeling is showing, etc., this overall sinking motion in here, which creates this dry air. There is some Saharan air layer sitting out here, but when air sinks, it dries and warms. And warm, dry air is not good for tropical cyclone development. And this is heading into that general area, and it doesn't look like it's going to relent anytime soon. A little bit more favorable upper level winds in here, but the overall sinking pattern doesn't look like it's going to let up and give Dorian much of a chance to develop. And we can see that reflected here in the GFS from today's run, the 12Z run. I'm just going to put this into motion. You see what happens. There's the vorticity signature with it right there. And see how it just kind of disappears over time? I mean, it does. It's just like, nope. Go back, use the slider. See it coming through there, and it just goes away. I mean, that too is pretty remarkable. We marvel at these things when they are powerful. Hey, the dog's barking outside. When they're powerful, shut up, dog. And I don't know if you can hear that, but she's right outside the office window. A little annoying. Wants some attention. Probably barking at the cat. The cat likes to sit in the window. Nevertheless, that distraction aside, we marvel at how strong these things get. We ooh and we ah at the satellite pictures of something like an Irma or Michael with that incredible eye, or Harvey, Katrina, whatever. On the flip side, I think it's equally fascinating when you see the atmosphere work against these systems. And it's true. See, look at that. That's really amazing. It's coming along. Very well-defined vorticity signature in here. Right there, just so you know what you're looking at. And it just kind of goes away. Why does it do that? Because it's moving into this area where a lot of factors are against it. The tropical upper tropospheric trough is hanging out in here. The wind through this area is generally moving brisk, and it's spreading out down at the surface. It's not piling up, so it does not aid in convergence. There's just a lot of things. The upper level winds are not good. The surface convergence not as good. The water temperatures through this area certainly warm enough, and that's just not enough, though. Warm water alone is not going to do the trick. So if we go back one more time, you see what happens. It comes in on this run just south of Barbados, through the Windward Islands there. And again, this yellow shading around the edges shows me that some of that energy may encroach upon Trinidad, Tobago that far south, with some scattered showers and thunderstorms, but nothing on the heavy side, and it should be moving fairly quickly. But you get a quick burst of 1 to 2 inches of rain over some of those areas, and as you know, down there, living down there, that can be a problem. Notice what else is happening or not happening, and I hardly even talked about it, because it's not looking like this is going to develop much. Isn't that weird? I mean, the Euro had a full-on hurricane sitting there. Remember? I showed you. Not so much anymore. What happened? Well, look at all that energy. And you can clearly see it's like it's just blown apart. It's literally stretched out over hundreds and hundreds of miles as compared to little Dorian down here that was able to focus its energy. So all things being equal, Dorian, pulled it together at least for a little bit, still is. This up here, though, that's a big mess. And it still has a chance to develop if we look through the model there. But man, that's nothing like we were seeing in earlier runs of both the GFS, but especially the Euro. These northeast winds through here could be pretty brisk from whatever low pressure does try to develop in here. And maybe it'll push some of that warmer ocean water back towards the shore. A couple of our subscribers on the HurricaneTrack Insider site mentioning lately about how chilly the water temperatures are off of part of the Outer Banks of North Carolina because we've had southwesterly flow blowing the ocean away from shore, creating what we call upwelling. Nevertheless, the tropics not looking nearly as threatening as they were just a couple of days ago. But still a noticeable uptick from zero from where we were a couple of days before that. So isn't it an interesting sequence of events? We went from, man, August just isn't going to have anything, to, whoa, we might have a couple of hurricanes, to, one of them probably won't even develop now, and the other one looks like it's going to die in the Caribbean Sea. That just goes to show you, this is always mystifying, challenging, and I would argue it keeps it very interesting, because if it was just, it would be nice if everything was cut and dry, and you knew for sure if something was going to develop and then how much so, if it does so, and where it ends up. But I dare say we may never get there, especially 3, 4, 5 days out. Look at Michael, the latest example of you just never know in some cases. There are cases when you absolutely know. Irma, 2017, we knew that one was going to be a problem. It was very clear in the guidance, the overall setup. The background state was favorable. For Dorian and 98L, not so much. So a little bit of uncertainty, but I'm becoming more certain that these will not be high impact events for the areas that they are headed into. All right? Tomorrow, a longer update. I will go over the usual tropical stuff, plus a look at the ENSO situation, El Nino Southern Oscillation. How's that doing? Sea surface temperatures, some of the background state stuff, kind of setting the tone for the week ahead. And really, as we wrap up the month of August, what do we look at as we go into September? Again, keys to the game, so to speak. These major puzzle pieces that we can see 5, 10, 15 days out can be helpful as guidance. Just like your headlights light the way, it's easier to use the headlights than to drive blindly with them off at night. Very wise advice, right? Generally true in the tropics. You try to use this model stuff for guidance and then go from there. Okie dokes. Have a great rest of your Sunday afternoon. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget, check the description for the link there to the Patreon blog. And remember, check that, bookmark it. And one more time, you do not have to be a contributing patron to access the public blog. If it's public, it'll say it's unlocked, and there you go. If it's not, you have to be a member for that. But I'm going to be doing much more with Patreon. I'll talk about that more tomorrow as well. Until then, again, have a great rest of your Sunday. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. I'll talk with you some more tomorrow.